Hey, everybody, welcome back. Bill De La Cruz with the Origination Point podcast. And this is session 3 of an approach that I want to take to talk about, is DEI dead? And if it is, where do we go from here? And if it's not, what are some of the components that need to stay and become enhanced? So I always am perusing the internet looking for articles and things that are happening in this DEI space. And I came up to one yesterday that says DEI giant abandons diversity statements for hiring promotion decisions after listening to faculty. So this is at the University of Michigan, where they announced that it will abandon diversity statements for hiring promotion and tenure decisions after an apparent push from faculty. And the reasoning is that requiring diversity statements has the potential to limit freedom of expression and diversity of thought on campus. And this is according to a press release from the university, while saying that they're still committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts as one of their 3 core values, and that their collective efforts in this area produced important strides in opening opportunities, and that they'll continuously refine their approach, which is really a great thing to hear because the approach needs to be refined. And it came ironically on the same day that the Board of Regents is voting on whether to dismantle or restructure its multi-million-dollar DEI program. Because it's faced harsh criticism, like most DEI programs across the country, that the program may be contributing to strained race relations on campus. And I don't disagree with that because a lot of the DEI work is divisive. It pits people against each other based on race and other areas of identity. And so in this process, they surveyed a couple thousand of their faculty, and some of the critics of diversity statements perceive them as expressions of personal identity traits, support of specific ideology or opinions on socially relevant issues, and serve as a litmus test of whether a faculty member's views are politically acceptable, the working group wrote in its report. Thus, as currently enacted, diversity statements have the potential to limit viewpoints and reduce diversity of thought among faculty members. And I will tell you that these diversity statements and these equity statements that organizations have embarked on are a waste of time because they're basically just words on a paper that people may or may not believe, or that, like was shared in this short article, could be a test to see if you're aligned with the same thought process that I have. So there's a lot of organizations that still require a personal equity statement as a condition for getting an interview or working in an organization. So I went to ChatGPT and I basically typed into ChatGPT to create an equity statement for an individual seeking employment with an organization that requires an equity statement as a condition for applying for a job or getting an interview. So here's what came up. As an individual committed to fostering equity and inclusion, I believe that creating equitable environments begins with acknowledging and addressing systemic barriers that limit access to opportunities for historically marginalized communities. I am dedicated to promoting fairness, embracing diversity, and working to ensure that everyone has the support and resources they need to thrive. Throughout my career, I have actively engaged in, and then it asks you to put down specific things that you've done, or facilitating conversations about inclusion, mentoring underrepresented colleagues, advocating for equitable practice in team decision making. These efforts have reinforced my belief that embracing diverse perspectives enriches both the workplace and the broader community. I continuously seek to examine my own biases, learn from others, and contribute to environments where respect, belonging, and collaboration are prioritized. My approach to equity is guided by a commitment to fairness and the understanding that meaningful change requires intentional action and sustained effort. By bringing this mindset into my professional life, I aim to support organizational goals that align with creating more inclusive, just, and empowering workplaces for all. So it sounds really nice, and it has all the right buzzwords: bias awareness, conversations about inclusion, learning from others, respect, belonging, collaboration. And I can get this right off of Chat GPT. And so part of my being against these types of approaches to creating more belonging and inclusive culture is that they don't lead to that. They're very performative in that they are just a process that says, tell us what you think, or here, let me tell you what we think from an organizational perspective. And I think it goes to what some of the critics at the University of Michigan came up with is, and let's see if you fit in with this. And if you don't, maybe this isn't the right place. And so even the idea of having this and examining it through our own biases of is it saying what we want it to say is promoting groupthink. And it doesn't really lead to any deep change. And so my approach as a practitioner of over 30 years in doing inclusion and belonging work is to ask, how is this going to support change? How is this going to make things different? And I will tell you that words on a paper do not make change. They don't make anything different. They may get you in the door. They may have some really nice, fluffy, good feeling about it when you read it. And yet the reality is that they have done nothing to change the dynamics of organizational culture or that we see, or the ways that we see each other from an identity perspective, not just a racial identity, but remember when I'm talking about this work, I'm talking about all of the intersectionalities of identity that we have, seen and unseen. And organizations created an equity statement, especially after George Floyd. A lot of organizations across this country hired a DEI person and created an equity statement. So here's an equity statement from an organizational perspective. All right, so let me get back to this organization. So I went to Chat GPT, as I said, and I asked for an individual equity statement to be written. And then I did one for an organization. And here's what came up. Organization name, whatever it is committed to fostering a culture of equity, inclusion, and belonging. We believe that a diverse and equitable environment strengthens our organization and enhances our ability to serve our community effectively. We understand equity to mean providing fair opportunities, resources, and support tailored to individual needs, recognizing that systemic barriers disproportionately impact people based on race, ethnicity, gender, ability, socioeconomic status, and other identities. Our commitment to equity is reflected in our hiring practices, professional development opportunities, and organizational policies. We actively seek to challenge bias, dismantle inequitable systems, and create pathways for underrepresented and historically marginalized individuals to thrive within our organization and beyond. At our organization, we value diverse perspectives and lived experiences and encourage all team members to contribute their authentic voices. By prioritizing equity, we aim to build a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to succeed. This commitment is not a single act, but an ongoing journey of learning, reflection, and action, ensuring that equity remains central to everything we do. It sounds really great. And when I go into organizations who show me their equity statement, my first question is, are you living up to this? What are the practices that you are doing that will reflect and that are reflected in this equity statement? What are your hiring practices? How do you onboard people who are different? Are you actually attracting people who are different? Or is it just something that you hope will happen? Hope is not a strategy. And the idea of an equity statement, when I say it's performative, it's because it doesn't really do anything to affect change. It's just a nice set of words on a paper. It might feel really good to those who read it. And yet the reality is, when the question is asked of how will it facilitate change and how will it be actualized in the organizational culture, the majority of organizations I've worked with over the last 20 years can't tell me that, because they haven't created the practices, the protocols, the policies, the training and development to be able to really manifest what it is that they're talking about in these statements. I've worked with organizations who have put people together for cohorts for months and years, going through culturally responsive practices and doing training. And I've actually asked them, tell me your experience. What was this like? And to a person, they said, I have to tell you, it was the greatest experience I ever had. I learned so much about myself, which is great. That's one aspect of it. The other element, though, is how did it result in any change in your organizational culture? And most of the people that I talk to can't tell me, and here's how it impacts how I do my work. Here's how it impacts how I see my colleagues differently. Here's how it impacts how I work through conflict. So my point in doing these talks on is DEI dead is really getting you all to think about, if your work isn't resulting in actionable, sustainable practices that disrupt the status quo, then it's performative and it's a waste of time. Why are we doing it if it's not going to facilitate change? And if it's not bought into by the leaders, then it's something that everybody else is being forced to do that the leaders don't really believe in, which also creates a performative outcome, because people will ask me in organizations that I work in, when we're doing a bias awareness workshop or a conflict transformation workshop, they'll ask me, is my boss doing this? Are the folks in the C-suite going through these same workshops that they're asking us to go through? And 80% of the time, the answer is no. No, they're not. And what I've done now is I won't even work with an organization if the C-suite doesn't buy into this work. In other words, they can't just anoint it, they have to go through it. They have to be creating the practices that they're asking the people that they lead to do, and not from a perspective of being divisive or in seeing if people have groupthink. That is not the result of a really robust diversity, equity, and inclusion approach. A real robust DEI approach is rooted in seeking difference, in acknowledging and accepting that we all have a unique perspective and that our perspective is really valid. This idea of groupthink is where DEI has gotten completely out of control, where we're going to have you write an equity statement to see if it matches what we believe you should be or do to be a part of our organization. That goes back to the biggest problem in HR hiring, which is we're hiring for fit. Are you the right fit? Which basically means, are you like us? Do you think like us? Do you look like us? Do you act like us? At the same time, we want to promote diversity, and you can't do both. If you're going to hire for fit, then you just have to acknowledge that we will never be diverse, because all we're doing is hiring to get people who look like us. And just acknowledge it, own it, and move on, and stop saying that you are creating inclusive and belonging and diverse environments, because you're not. You're creating environments where people have to think alike or they get marginalized. That's where all of this bias of ideological bias has come into play in the last few years, is that people come in and they have a different thought process and they're marginalized. And it doesn't matter what race or color or age or what other identities they have. Even someone that you would consider mainstream in terms of the dominant culture can be ideologically or perspectively marginalized because they don't agree with the rest of the group. And so we've got to move out of this fit thing also. It's not serving us. And And so diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't about getting people who all agree. It's about recognizing that the real richness of organizational culture is in a diversity of thought. It's in a diversity of life and cultural experiences. It's in people bringing their perspectives based on their lived experiences, not on whether they're acceptable in our culture. And so equity statements today, when I go to an organization and they say, we want to create an equity statement, my first question is why? To what end? What's it going to accomplish? And I encourage people not to waste your time doing it, because it's a lot of time that people put in, because every sentence has to be wordsmithed. And you have to wordsmith it with 6 or 8 or 10 or however many individuals. And then in the end, it's just a piece of paper that has a bunch of words on it that's not going to facilitate any change. When I go into organizations to work with them, I want to ask them, what are the goals that you want to achieve? How are we going to measure them? How are we going to create accountability? And how are we going to create sustainability? So those 4 areas: awareness, action, accountability, and sustainability. That's the framework for really robust DEI work. And if that's not built in to your work, then if you're a practitioner, you might be making a lot of money on it and not really making a lot of change. And if you're the person who's actually hoping that it makes a difference, you'll be disappointed. And so what I'm encouraging you to think about, if you're really committed to diversity, equity, inclusion work, belonging work, justice work, stop creating equity statements, move out of those cute acronyms, and just do the work. And what the work is about leading with relationships. It's about becoming aware of how our biases, judgments, and stereotypes impact how we see each other. It's answering this question: do my biases inhibit or enhance my ability to be in authentic relationship? Do my stereotypes inhibit or enhance my ability to be in authentic relationship? Do my judgments inhibit or enhance my ability to be in authentic relationship? An authentic relationship is defined as getting to know you for who you are versus the story that I'm making up about you. Authenticity is rooted in the individual who is in front of me. Authenticity is not rooted in the story that I'm making up about you. And it goes to this adage that I've had for a long time, which is that if you give someone enough time and you just interact with them based on who they are, they will show you who they are. They will show you what they value. And then from that perspective, I can make a decision about, do we have enough connecting points to stay in relationship with each other? Or is this someone that I'm just going to meet? We're going to have a couple of good interactions and then we'll part ways. And that's okay too. I'm not going to click with everybody. And the challenge of this is that in our workplaces, we still have to be professional. We still have to be respectful, even when we don't click with each other. And that's a really big challenge right now in organizational culture, where you have people who can't let go of something that happened years ago and they bring it up, or they can't apologize, or they can't acknowledge that they were hurt and that they want to move through it or talk to the other person. And that's the real work of diversity, equity, inclusion. And for me, again, as I say over and over again, I frame it as just inclusion and belonging. Belonging is personal. Can I be my most authentic self? Inclusive is organizational. What are the policies, practices, and protocols that either lead to a culture of belonging or lead to a culture of othering? And my objective in creating these short podcasts to get you thinking about this is, if your organization is doing DEI work, what's the impact? If you're hiring somebody and paying them thousands of dollars to do DEI work, how do you know that the processes and the practices that they're putting in place for you are successful? Are they there year after year after year without much growth? Or is there an exit strategy? Because there has to be an exit strategy. If this work is done well, the facilitator is impacting the system in such a way that they work themselves out of a job. That's the greatest showing of change, is when an organization calls me and says, we really appreciate everything you've done, and you know what, we don't need you anymore because we have embedded the practices in our culture. We have shared this whole idea of equity. We don't have a diversity person. We have a diversity culture, or we have an inclusive culture, or we have an equitable culture where everyone is owning the work. And I have to tell you, that's the greatest call I get. It's usually after two. Never has there been an organization that I've had to work with for more than 3 years that wasn't committed and had all of the practices and systemic structures in place that they didn't need a consultant anymore, because they had done so much upskilling their folks and training and leading with relationships, not leading with divisiveness, but leading with relationships. Relational leadership is a key driver of inclusion and belonging. So they're actually leading with connecting, not dividing. So my hope is that you'll start thinking about this work from a different perspective, because I'm tired of all of the politicization of something that is near and dear to my heart, and something that I know, done with fidelity, can create the kind of world that we're all looking for. A world that's connected, a world that can talk to each other. And our next couple of podcasts, we're going to start to get into communication and talk about the role that communication plays in this whole process. So if this is interesting to you, send us some of your thoughts. delacruzleadershipsolutions.com. There's a contact button there. Hit it. Talk to me. Ask me questions. If you have an interest in being interviewed on this podcast, let me know. I'm happy to hear different perspectives. And so the idea of my approach is to get you to think differently about what we're doing here, and lose the politicized approach that's being fed to us that is mostly rooted in false narratives. And if you're hiring somebody to do work, if you are a practitioner, think about the impact that you have on people. Because the other part of this approach and this work is it's highly emotional. And when a practitioner goes into an organization and raises the level of emotion and leaves it there and then says, thank you all, now my time is up, I'm going to go and I'm going to submit my invoice, you've just made it worse. Because what I know about this approach is I'm asking people to go to parts of themselves that they don't often explore, parts of themselves that they may not be really happy with, parts of themselves that they know they want to change. It's really emotional. And when people get emotionally charged, it's important that we as practitioners don't allow them to walk out with that, because then they're going to take that and put it somewhere else. And so emotion is where change comes from. So I want to support people in creating a process where there's an emotional response. It's just that if it goes like this, I want to make sure that over our time together, I level it out and actually lower it, so that when they walk out, they're not walking out emotionally charged. They're walking out emotionally aware and thinking about what are the lessons, or what are the takeaways from this experience that I've just had. What are they, and how can I apply them in my own life? I think that this work is the only way to counter all of the hate and all of the negativity and all of the divisiveness that we see on our planet, that we see in our country, in our communities, in our organizations, our schools, our workplaces, grocery stores, everywhere. And so I'm just encouraging you all to think about it, to think about your role, and to be kind. Be kind to each other, be kind to yourself. So we're going to get into communication and the role that communication plays in our next couple of podcasts. Again, If you like it, share it, subscribe, and you'll be the first to hear when we drop a new episode. So thank you so much for your engagement, your time, your awareness, and your thoughts. And most importantly, keep growing. Take care, everybody.